Okay, right. Well, our speaker this evening is Jim Cuthbert. He's actually one of our board members. He's also a registered professional conservation biologist, environmental conservation activist, and an outdoor activity enthusiast with a very strong attachment to nature. He's had a varied career. He primarily helped to manage protected areas, including national, provincial, regional, and municipal parks. He served as the manager of Islands Trust Conservancy, senior project officer for the Land Conservancy, and national director for the Western Canada Wilderness Committee. After completing his long career with BC Parks, Jim established his own environmental consulting company. He's volunteered on nonprofit community service boards, including the award-winning Parkgate Community Services Society in North Vancouver. As a 7-year counselor for North Vancouver, he led many successful environmental initiatives and contributed to the award-winning environmental protection bylaw and spearheaded the rezoning of the lower and mid-flank of Mount Seymour from residential to park, recreation, and wilderness. So he's a very varied career. And tonight he's going to be talking about Fairy Creek and the forests and so on, ecosystem. So with that, I will pass it over to Jim.
Thank you very much, Phil, and good evening, everyone. It means a lot to me that you've turned out tonight, so I'd like to thank you very much. I know it's a busy time of year, particularly a busy day for many people today, including myself. So I'm thrilled that had such a large turnout. And I hope that I can provide some new information on what is really a very intriguing subject. That is the history of Fairy Creek and what it offers in terms of its special ecological values. I'm going to refer to some notes as I set the scene for the talk. From 2021 until 2022, I was a member of a small group of scientists very concerned about the fate of Fairy Creek watershed near Port Renfrew. It's at that time, and fortunately still is, an almost untouched watershed of old growth forest on southern Vancouver Island. And it would be considered the only untouched watershed of old growth forest on southern Vancouver Island, hence the tremendous interest in it and the tremendous need to protect it. Our group consisted of Dr. John Nielsen. He has a training in being a large pelagic species specialist, but his interest changed, as you'll hear in just a few moments, because the presentation tonight is essentially from him, and with his permission, I'm presenting it to you. He was hoping to be here tonight, but work commitments and other commitments prevented him from being here. Secondly, on our team, small team, was Dr. Royanne Petrel, and she's an avifauna specialist based out of Nanaimo, and you might have even heard about some of her work in the Fairy Creek and also Fairy Lake, as well as the area around Lake Cowichan, the west end of Lake Cowichan, on screech owls and also marbled murrelets more down towards Port Renfrew. Other specialists include Dr. Lois Magnon, and he's a botanist, expert botanist with expertise in mosses, lichens, bryophytes, and many other species of plants. He's stepped back from active lobbying and also active public presentations, which kept him very busy. He's still very active in terms of his writing and documenting and publishing as well. And some of those publishing reports came out quite recently, and they do relate to the protection of old growth forests with emphasis on vulnerable species. Next is Tasha Ladovsky, and Tasha was very fortunate to have a new discovery, and this was a discovery of a type of lichen. I believe it was referred to as speckled-bellied lichen that is rare, very rare in Canada. So that gave her an opportunity to have it highlighted in a somewhat public way. And she's continuing to support our work. She was hoping to be here, but she's got work commitments that prevented that from tonight. And finally, I mentioned two other members of our team. They're a pair, a retired pair of husband and wife from Pender Island. And Peter Pear is a doctor specializing in medical care, medical research, particularly at UBC. The last two people I just mentioned, Peter and his wife, they were extremely helpful in terms of navigating through heavy terrain, difficult terrain. They have tremendous ability to move through heavy forest and keep us on track. So we appreciate their contribution greatly. Supporting our group were many volunteers, mostly young adults, including a very large and impressive turnout from the UVic Birding Club, which actually overnighted, I believe, on more than one occasion out at the Fairy Lake Campground and had a great recreational time. Their ability was outstanding in terms of their knowledge of different aspects of ecologies and different and ecology and different species. And I'm certainly impressed with what's happening at UVic in terms of the biology and botany department. I'll just mention, since I'm talking about young people, of course, young people played a tremendous instrumental part in what happened at Fairy Creek and what's still happening. And I will mention, having been out there a lot, that they came from all over, particularly Eastern Canada, the States, and of course, locally here in BC. Now, thank you. I will mention that the effort to collect biophysical data, which was our mission in the Fairy Creek area, has been very challenging and certainly very, very interesting and rewarding. Our significant efforts to secure legal permission to access the non-active parts of the large tree farm license were numerous. We tried very hard to get permission to go into the areas that were being logged or about to be logged or had just been logged, but that was not successful. Just before we go on, because it may not be possible at the end of the talk, I'm going to mention just three other initiatives that are related to the topic tonight, which I think you'll be interested in knowing and have access to. First of all, I mentioned there was a 2.25-hour flight on a fixed-wing plane that was documenting the Fairy Creek area and the area from Jordan River, which is where I grew up to Fairy Creek, and then from there up to the Carmanah. So that's all available on the internet. It's excellent photography. So if you're interested in getting to know what this area is like from the air, and it would include the adjacent valleys of Fairy Creek, I would recommend you tune in to that. That'll be made available to you through our society. And it will also include great photography of Vancouver Island up to Carmanah, from Carmanah to Cowichan Lake, and then from Cowichan Lake back to the Victoria Airport. Secondly, I'll mention that there's another initiative happening right now to collect data similar to what we're talking about tonight, and it's for 3 proposed cut blocks just to the east of Botanical Beach Park near Port Renfrew. So if anyone is interested in finding out more about that or becoming involved as a volunteer to help with the field work to collect or collate the information that we're collecting, you'd be more than welcome. And finally, I'll mention that there is a second PowerPoint, somewhat similar to this one tonight, that's being put together by the Vancouver Island Library branch out of their Duncan branch, or Vancouver Island Library System, I should say, out of their Duncan branch. And it was well received too. So it's also available on the internet, and we can help through the society with contact or possibly present that at a future date. So if we can go on to, before we go on to the second slide, these images in front of you show you how partway through the process of collecting information about the Fairy Creek area, we are of course interested in the abundance of the species that we were finding, and that's what's captured here. They're not complete, of course. For example, the lower right-hand corner, where you see the picture of the marbled murrelet, we have hundreds and hundreds of sightings of marbled murrelets, and some of them come at twilight, just as you're seeing the first indications of the day starting with sunlight, and that's with field studies where we're out camped at the base of large, huge, old-growth, mature trees that were alive, doing well at the time, and host for these intriguing birds, the marbled murrelets. We'll go on to the second slide now, please. Again, I'll just indicate that it was Dr. John Nielsen's thought and initiative to put this slide show together. So I've talked to him about it briefly. He's given me my permission to send it with his encouragement, or to present it rather with his encouragement. So you'll see that it's had quite an impact on his life. I would like to read it out just for clarity if anyone's having a hard time reading the words, and also it would be wise to make sure I don't miss anything. So Dr. John Nielsen's reasons for being at Fairy Creek. He says, first of all, I am a fisheries scientist, so I am out of my comfort zone. Initially, that was a couple of years ago. Things have changed since then, but that's where he was initially, 2021. From 2016 to 2019, I was a member of the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, more commonly known as COSEWIC, and it's Canada's national body dealing with the assessment of species at risk. As a member of that very well-known and very important critical group, he heard assessments of many species, but often including species from the West Coast, the productive old-growth forests of BC, particularly valley floors. And of course, the Fairy Creek Valley includes a large, almost completely intact valley. This drew John's attention to the controversy surrounding the Fairy Creek, one of the last relatively intact watersheds in southern Vancouver Island outside of existing parks. And I will mention that the reason he uses the word relatively intact is that the very southern part of the Fairy Creek area, Fairy Creek Valley, or drainage, the Fairy Creek watershed, has been logged, which is understandable though, because it's right down adjacent to the valley bottom floor, just to the east of Port Renfrew. If we could go on to the next slide, please. Old growth forests are becoming increasingly scarce in southern Vancouver Island and elsewhere. As we have heard from many sources, old growth forests are being cut at an alarming rate. The graphic on the right, which would be the two images of Vancouver Island, shows the situation in 2012, which would be the lower map, the one that appears mostly yellow and light green. So that was the status, and I'll explain what the colors mean in a minute, but we'll read the text first. So the graphic on the right shows the situation in 2012 compared with pre-colonial distribution of old growth. So I may have misspoken there where I said the bottom one on the right. Yes, that would be 212. The one that I'm referring to now, which is described as the pre-colonial distribution of old growth, is the map at the top of Vancouver Island, top right-hand side of the screen. And that's as reported by the Ancient Forest Alliance. Since then, we know that there is even less old growth remaining. Well, that's an understatement, of course, because this presentation was made a couple of years ago, and the old growth logging has continued. That's what the Fairy Creek fight was all about. As I heard about Fairy Creek, this is John Nielsen speaking, and the plans to log the watershed, I assume that extensive biological surveys must have been done to document the plants and animals in this increasingly rare ecosystem. In checking publicly available data and checking with knowledgeable colleagues, I found I was wrong. In fact, very little was known. And I'll just put an aside here from my point of view that I was also very shocked. I assumed that the Ministry of Forests would have a team of foresters and biologists, ecosystem biologists, that would be focused on developing a reasonable knowledge of the land that they, through the Ministry of Forests and BC Timber Sales, was going to be approving for logging, just so they knew what was there and presumably take steps to protect the most valuable parts. It doesn't appear that that has ever been done to any significant extent. Back to John's comments at the bottom. Our approach for Fairy Creek, and this is the team that I described a little bit earlier. Let's use available citizen science tools, citizen science tools, to document what is there before it is gone, or more optimistically, perhaps enlightened public pressure might lead to long-term protection for the threatened species and their entire ecosystem. Now, if we could shift our attention to the right-hand side of the slide. as I say, the legends basically show that the green area is undisturbed old growth forest. In the top slide, that would be in pre-colonial times. So very little disturbance of the old growth forest, essentially none, because the First Nations impact would be considered insignificant in terms of its effect on the integrity of the ecosystem, to my knowledge. Secondly, there is some reference to the white. You can see the third bar down, left-hand side of the top legend, and that would be ice fields and permanent snow. In the bottom slide on the right-hand side, of course, it shows how things have changed dramatically, almost unbelievably, to having very little old growth in 2012, which now is a long time ago. So since then, of course, the map showing the extent of old growth on Vancouver Island and the adjacent southwest mainland of Vancouver Island would be even further diminished because the old growth logging continues, which is at the heart of our protest and our concern. So it's a very bleak situation, and it's an embarrassing history for many people, but we want to try and turn it around. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Just moving my pictures around. I should say my thumbnail there. Thank you for your patience. All right. How important is citizen science in conservation decision-making? The answer is critically important. It can be used simply to document occurrences in presence, absence studies, and now used for long-term monitoring of population trends, especially in the bird world. And of course, with iNaturalist and the very active involvement that the Provincial BC Museum has developed over the last number of years, it's expanding greatly in terms of our use of citizen science to support our knowledge of our ecosystems. Second point that John makes is an example from COSEWIC's May 2021 press release. Citizen science observers across the continent are fundamentally important in determining population trends. For this, in the case of birds, species, and many others, we couldn't do our assessments without them, commented Birds Subcommittee co-chair Richard Elliott. Next slide, please, Phil. So there's obviously a data gap, and I've just explained how large that data gap is in terms of having a situation in BC where the responsible resource managers truly know what it is that they're managing. And it's a very dangerous situation that we've been living with, where the logging, not only second growth, but particularly old growth logging, is proceeding without knowledge, without a significant knowledge of what it is that's being destroyed. So this is John's introduction to the iNaturalist Fairy Creek situation. And he is encouraging with his comments, as I'll go through them, anyone can get involved. Uploading photos from a smartphone or camera is straightforward. It is a great citizen scientist enabler. And we have, in our case, 57 of them contributing observations and 195 people providing identifications. And some of those identifications were extremely interesting. For example, one of them was a recorded sighting with photography of a giant salamander, which a lot of people had never seen before. Same with a recent observation I had of a martin, a playful martin. You remember these sightings for the rest of your life. Next point, observations made within the Fairy Creek project area are automatically added according to their GPS locations. And the GPS location information is usually available from the volunteers or the team that were out there because of the technology of our cell phones. His next point, no special expertise in identification is needed, simply a good quality picture following the guidelines of iNaturalist. And as you know, possibly better than I, with the technology now, and this has been around for a while, you can get automatic species identification, which are likely very accurate just by the technology that's built into the internet that's accessed through cell phones. This next, second to last point, observations can be photographs, audio files, and evidence such as footprints. And I'm just going to move my insets here so I can see the bottom. Thank you. And another benefit, of course, another plus is that the data are publicly available. On this image that's occupying most of the slide, you can see a picture what almost looks like a coastal area, but it's not coastal. The outlined area in light yellow marks the outside boundary, just outside the boundary of the watershed of Fairy Creek. And as you can see, the red marks are denoting species identification sites. And as John will mention later in this presentation, they were focused at the very north end, or what would be described as the head end of the watershed, and also at the downstream end, where the Fairy Creek itself drains into the drainage of the San Juan Valley, which is really quite flat and very extensive. So that explains them. There were a couple of sightings in the middle or towards the middle, but boy, I can tell you from personal experience, they're very hard to get in there. It's extremely challenging terrain, very steep, surprisingly steep compared to the valleys on either side. So on the bottom, John is including some photographs of recent observations, and I'm not able to tell you what they are, but I will certainly have that information for the next presentation. I'd like to go on to the next slide, please, John. Phil, thank you. All right. I'm just going to suggest that we go with this one now. We're there. Again, focusing on the opportunity that iNaturalist offers. Within iNaturalist, we have set up our own project page, so that will be there. It's still there, I understand, to show our Fairy Creek research, and that's how it's titled, as you can see from the upper picture on the top of the screen, where it shows a picture of a slug up close. John's second bullet point there, our banner page features the iconic Pacific banana slug in black morphology. Yeah, very clear up close image. Third point, our project is still at an early stage, having started in late May. So that was some time ago now. And while this show is dated because of when it was first put together, a lot of the opportunities for expanding it still are there. So we'd like to continue on with this work. Last point on the bottom, last bullet point. With minimal survey effort, we have documented 329 species from 948 observations as of October the 27th. And that was the first year of developing the iNaturalist program for the Fairy Creek area. On the bottom right-hand side, you can see he's got some additional features there to consider. The lung lichen, the barred owl audio, red buried elder, and western sword fern. So this illustrates that we weren't focusing all of our attention just on vulnerable species, which are hard to find. We're attempting to record anything that would be considered somewhat unusual or have a particular appeal, and that would go beyond the standard species that we'd normally run into in large measure, such as western hemlock and western red cedar, Sitka spruce, that sort of thing. And as you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner, he's got a summary. I hope you can read it at home on your screen, but it shows individuals that had been contributing the species, and they were categorized as most species, most observations rather on the left, most species in the middle, and most observed species, including the Pacific banana slug, western toad, which is one that I certainly saw and photographed, cabbage lung lichen, coastal rookholm, and western rattlesnake plantain. That's just, see if I can go down a little further on my slide. I don't think I can, but that gives you a taste of what's available in the data. Next slide, please, Phil. Okay. The project area is shown on the right, chosen to encompass both the watershed and the upper camps. And when there's a reference to upper camps, what that refers to are the protest camps. They're not the logging camps. they're the protest camps. And there were five, possibly a sixth one, but certainly five during the active years of 2021 and 22. I know them well because every week, usually without many exceptions, I would help with the food delivery from Victoria to those camps. Second point, because of access issues you are all aware of, we haven't covered a lot of watershed. On that topic, there is a concerted effort with many people contributing to try and get the authorities to provide scientists with the permission to go into the logging areas, certainly not with the understanding that they go right at the site of the trees coming down with the power saws and heavy machinery, but that they go into the very large area covered by tree farm license 47, I believe. Yes, it was a vast area, and the ruling by the courts were that no one was to be in that area because it was considered to be excluded from public access, of course, and that was a very strong bone of contention. But tonight we're going to avoid going into the controversy, more deal almost exclusively with the science and the ecology of the area. The third point, most of the observations are made at the opposite ends of the watershed, which is obvious, and I've already mentioned that. And in the bottom, again, a variety of different images that show conclusively that it wasn't just animals that we were looking for, but plants as well. One of the things that I'd hoped to do early on was to obtain the services of some volunteer botanists, one in particular, but unfortunately things didn't line up, and we lost that opportunity to have a very detailed survey of the area within reason, because it's a very remote and difficult area to access by volunteer botanists with training at the PhD level. So hopefully that can still be done for, if not this area, other areas. Next slide, please. Okay. Thank you. Of our top 15 species to date, our top 15 species to date are shown on the right. So you can see these would be the top 15, I'm quite sure, in terms of abundance, the number. And I've already mentioned about the slug. Others, the toad, do you see that? I've already mentioned, without any slides, of the giant salamander, cabbage lung lichen, coastal brook phone, and you can read them yourself because I'm having some difficulty with some other imagery on the screen blocking all of them. But there's quite a range there, and we, of course, were at all times either watching for rare or endangered species, plants, as well as animals, and would have benefited from having people that are more that are trained in botany. We didn't have that as much as we'd like. In terms of the total number on the lower left-hand corner, you can see 319 species in a very short time, and the number of species is categorized by color. So that way you can read in terms of the number of amphibians, for example, in blue, unknown, this forms a small part, fungi, plants. And if the imagery is not exact, I apologize for that, but these images are certainly available later on if you wish to check it out in more detail. Next slide, please, John. Excuse me, Phil. So here's some fun observations that resulted from our project. And first, upper left, with the RG in the upper left-hand corner, a stoat seemed determined to eat the sock of this observer at Helicamp. And Helicamp was one of the 5 camps that were almost continuously occupied by protesters throughout this long period of time. They're also the site of the visits by the RCMP, of course, which changed things dramatically. And it's a site that we used to go to begin our hike up into another camp, which is very remote, called Ridge Camp. And from Ridge Camp, it was very close to the initial discovery of logging about to happen that was made by a supporter at his computer in Olympia, Washington. And by looking at the very recent imagery from satellites, he was able to tell that the logging activity was imminent, and as a result of that information being fed quickly to interesting folks on southern Vancouver Island, it was effectively stopped through physical protest and blockades. Next point, second one down on the list of bullet points on the left-hand side, evidence of ruins near here, and that you can see bottom left-hand corner, the black bear print, and there is a black bear observation you might have noticed earlier on in the first slide tonight. The next bullet point, top right, this observation turned out to be a band-tailed pigeon feather, a species at risk. Notes indicated the identification was confirmed by a feather specialist from the Rocky Point Bird Observatory. And since I did spend a lot of time out there during those 2 years, I was able to record photographically some band-tailed pigeons as well in that area. So we have that information, hopefully to take it the next step in our efforts to have logging in these sensitive areas stopped, old growth logging. Bottom right, reticulate tail dropper slug, who has the handy ability of dropping its tail when threatened. And to give you an example of one of our really exciting moments, we were hiking as a group of about 10, usually 10 or 12 people that had gathered, and hiking through some rough, dense forest near the south end of the watershed, so very close to Fairy Creek, where it empties into the flat valley. And we came across one of these tail dropper slugs. And according to the close-up observers, he did his thing in the sense that he separated the back part of his body so that he could continue his trip up the tree. And on the bottom right-hand corner of the image in front of you, and the slide in front of you, there's another image of a slug as well. So on to the next slide, please, Phil. Now, this is getting to the focus that interests me most, and that is with regard to what can be done to protect federally listed species at risk in Fairy Creek. And again, following John's words, he says, so far, birds are well represented in the at-risk list. And that would be the list of at-risk species for Fairy Creek. Western screech owl, northern goshawk, banded-tailed pigeon, marbled murrelet, olive-sided flycatcher, possibly peregrine falcon. And that's a shorter list than what I was able to come up with. I believe we had 15 fairly recently in terms of the number of species that would be in that category. The multiple sightings made of screech owls and marbled murrelet. On the screech owl research done by the lady from Nanaimo, Dr. Royanne Petrel, she apparently was up in the active logging area. This would be up in the area around the northwest end of Cowichan Lake, and was attacked by a very concerned screech owl that apparently came down and with its talons extended, went right at her computer screen, laptop, of course. So that was quite an incident, I'm sure, quite an experience to have. Yes, there's lots of stories about that area in terms of protesters being up in elevated structures high up in the trees and having to be removed. Also mentioned with regard to the peregrine falcon, we did have a sighting, and that sighting would be in what they called helicamp that I mentioned earlier. And so it was confirmed, and observations of what appeared to be a peregrine falcon as well. I was lucky enough to see one up very close in the Gulf of Mexico not too long ago, so I'll never forget that. It was spectacular. Also, with regard to marbled murrelet, there is a lot of concerted research effort put it into trying to document the marbled murrelet population within the area of the upper watershed of Fairy Creek and the adjacent watersheds, particularly high up, because that's where they are nesting. And so, as I mentioned earlier, very briefly, it meant all-night stints, being there early in the morning when they would fly in. These birds, the marbled murrelets, would fly in from the ocean in large numbers and occupy their nests. Next point is the second bullet point. Among amphibians, western toads, many records, and northern red-legged frog. And the third point was our group has also made recordings of the little brown bats near Fairy Lake. This is an endangered level species. And fortunately, we had the room at Fairy Creek Campground to have that serve as a base, which was very comfortable. And it's an idyllic setting. If you haven't been to Fairy Creek, which is partially protected as a Ministry of Forest recreation site, I would recommend that. Fourth point at the bottom, all this with a low level of search effort thus far. So that's true. Yes, we hadn't at that point put a lot of effort into it. So we'll move on to the next slide, please, Phil. Vulnerable species defined by iNaturalist. iNaturalist provides a mechanism to report on vulnerable species. Vulnerable in this context means species that appear in the IUCN or National Species List. Also tied to his comment there is the fact that a lot of people have been working closely with the Migratory Bird Act and one other piece of legislation that have been around for a long time, and trying to use those as justification for stopping the old growth logging, because the activity of old growth logging contravenes completely the intention of the Migratory Bird Act. So there's work being done on that, including a lawyer who has become an eco-hero in the island of Kauai in Hawaii, and also served as a judge. And she's helping to lead a legal challenge of old growth logging in areas where the Migratory Bird Act applies. Second bullet point down on this slide, in a report prepared on October the 28th, we have seen 70 observations of 16 vulnerable species. And of course, we like to take this, those of us still involved, would like to take this to the next step. And part of that would be working with the team that I just mentioned. Next slide, please, Phil. The top two vulnerable species appear broad spread in the valley, which says a lot, because it means that, it's quite clear that the valley is worth protecting because of the fact that it's well used by these two top vulnerable species. As explained earlier, our surveys are at an early stage, and they haven't been continued with the same vigor as they were in 2021 particularly, and to a lesser extent in 2022. So clearly, the more we collect data about this special area of the Fairy Creek Valley, the more likely it will be protected long-term, because the protection cannot be described in any way as being secure at this point. Even so, John goes on to say, we have enough observations of the two most frequently observed rare species to map their distributions. And you see a little bit of that on the map that's in the center of the screen, showing observations near the upper, or what would be considered the northern end of the valley. The western toad, third point, the western toad and band-tailed pigeon were found in areas of watershed where we looked. This could imply that these two species, rare elsewhere, occur broadly in this watershed. So any assessment of this area would focus on that, realizing that this area has extra special merit for being protected. You can see a picture of the band-tailed pigeon in the upper right corner, and in the center upper of the image is a picture from the top dorsal surface of the western toad. And the bottom right-hand image shows some additional observations of either one of those two species. I'm not sure which. Next slide, please, Phil. Many species documented, but they only are the tip of the iceberg. We need to expand both our spatial and seasonal coverage. Thus far, we have sampled mostly the north and south extremities of the watershed, with no observations in fall or winter as yet. And I will mention that we did try and organize expeditions through the center of the valley. And while one or two individuals made it from east to west, it was not without great difficulty. So it was not possible, because of the need for ropes and that sort of thing, to do that cross-valley survey. But it can be done. It's just that we did not have the capability to do it earlier on. Second point, many habits within the study area are unsampled. And that, in fact, most habitats within the study area are unsampled. In the adjacent Renfrew Creek watershed, where our team spent quite a bit of time because there was active logging in there, and therefore there is a great number of protesters. In fact, the total number of protesters that were arrested, not mentioning all the others that weren't, which would be very numerous, the total number arrested were 1,100, over 1,100 individuals arrested. And that equates to the largest occurrence of civil disobedience in Canadian history. So obviously, the public were very concerned about this and still are. So he goes on to say, just repeat it for clarity, many habitats, second point, many habitats within the study area are unsampled. In the adjacent Renfrew Creek watershed, we recently examined a single water sample and found 32 microscopic aquatic species, including the very interesting tardigrade called a water bear, well suited for survival in the extreme environments. And I believe the upper right-hand corner of your image will capture that. It also gives me an opportunity to emphasize the next point, which reads, from experience in the adjacent watersheds to Fairy Creek, we know there were whole communities of specialized epiphytes living in the forest canopy. It could be said that the sky is the limit for documenting the extensive biota of Fairy Creek. Interesting way to summarize a very important point, and that is the number of species that have been recorded of insects that have been found with personal observations and recording in the canopy in the Carmanah area, and in that general area, not specifically Carmanah, but in the area that's threatened, adjacent to Carmanah, I should say, is well in excess of 200 species. And of those 200 species, a significant number are new to science. So if that isn't justification for protecting these areas, I don't know what is, because it's potentially possible that all of them could be logged. Certainly old growth forest logging is completely destructive to that type of biota. And I believe that could be bringing us towards the end. Phil, could you please check?
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Is that a picture of Big Lonely Doug?
A picture of which? Are you talking about the picture with the blue sky at the bottom?
Yeah.
And what did you ask? What is picture of what?
Big Lonely Doug, which is...
Oh, yes. Again, the names of people that are observing has obscured it, but I'm finally able to move it almost off my screen. And I have to hold it there. I'm just getting the image to show on my screen because of the names of our observers showing up. Yes, that is Old Lonely Doug. And in this case, I'm sure it is because I've seen it many times and I've been to the base of it numerous times. It appears very much like a individual protester is climbing, or a person supporting protesters is climbing with the benefit of a rope. So they're probably either going up, halfway up approximately, or coming down. Yeah. And that was a very important protest technique used to keep the loggers out of areas that were considered prime areas to protect. For example, I mentioned Heli Camp and Ridge Camp, and as you take about a 2-hour hike from Heli Camp on the northeast side of the upper valley of Fairy Creek to Ridge Camp on the northwest side of Fairy Creek, where the logging was about to take place, and that was just about lost within the valley. You'll see numerous platforms that are extremely high in the air, and those were there for the sitters that chose to protest by making the tree essentially unloggable because of a human body being suspended on a platform high up. And that was also used elsewhere, as I mentioned, up in other areas that were threatened, but not in the Fairy Creek Valley.
All right. Okay, well, thank you, Jim. There are some questions in the chat. Should I go through those?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Mark Worthing says, this is a side note, those are Dave Leversey Sierra Club BC maps, not Ancient Forest Alliance. Minor detail, he says.
Oh, well, thank you. That's important. Yes, I tried to get a hold of the Forest Alliance just to confirm the authenticity of that map. But I understand from what you said, Phil, and I didn't catch it all, but it sounds like that map was produced under the direction of the Sierra Club of BC, not the Forest Alliance network.
Yes, that's
Alliance,
what it says.
is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yes.
what he said. I assume he's correct.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, just for your information.
Right.
And he says,
Thank you,
yes,
Mark. Right. Well, it's a map that I would highly recommend to everyone because it captures the essence of the problem graphically and very effectively. You can't argue with it because it's accurate information and it's stunning. It's alarming. It's very unfortunate.
yeah. Okay. And Adolf Cheska has a question. How many collections were made? Collections are required for species you cannot identify by sight or by ear.
That I do not know, other than what was presented in terms of the number of sightings. But of course, that's not what Adolf was asking about. Information that I can gladly obtain by contacting other members of the team that would have access to that. I'm having the thought that our data is not going to be considered typically as rigorous as most scientific data is when people are doing, funded studies. We'd like it to be, but I'm sure it's not. And it just calls for more research, more repetitive sightings, and more repetitive findings of whatever is being recorded so that it is considered legitimate.
Yeah. Okay, the next question from Mike Wyeth. Some of the iNaturalist observations appear to be in water. Is that correct?
Well, there was one. I can only speak to the one that I'm aware of. And the ones that I can recall seeing pictures of that we've all seen tonight, I believe those were all terrestrial-based photographs. But there was a reference to the sampling of a water sample, and that, of course, was aquatic. But
Right.
he may be right. I may have missed some of the images that captured species that were aquatic. That's obviously a gap in our studies. The one I was referring to now is what reads, and I've got it in front of me here. We recently examined a single water sample and found 32 microscopic aquatic species. So obviously those were from an aquatic environment, and they would have been sampled from a water body. I don't know if it was a stream, a wetland, Fairy Creek itself. Not sure.
Yeah, I think I did see one shot of a frog underwater, or so. Yeah,
Thanks for mentioning that, Phil, because that could be the one that he was asking about.
yeah.
Of course,
Okay.
iNaturalist would be a good source to go to look at what we do have.
Yeah, so I guess they're all recorded there under that project, the Fairy Creek project, is it, on iNaturalist?
I believe it's titled Fairy Creek Research.
Okay. Okay, the next question is Jan Walsh-Howard. Is there a reason why so many flowers of plants noted here are white?
Could you repeat the question, please, Phil?
Is there a reason why so many of the flowers of plants noted here are white?
There may be, but I'm certainly prepared to ask the author of the PowerPoint show. That's Dr. John Nielsen. I would think, and this is just a guess, that just happened to match with what was in bloom when they were there taking the pictures.
It may be because it's dark, so the white flowers are more visible than
All right.
colored ones.
Right.
Well,
Thanks, Adolf.
yeah. Could you ask, or could I ask her directly if she'd like to get feedback from John Nielsen? He's very keen on this project, not only in the past, but going forward. So I could certainly ask him, put that question to him. And if I had a way of contacting her, or he could contact her if she was prepared to give her contact information.
Okay, did you get that, Jan? Okay, I'll move on to the next question. It's from Vicky Metcalf. Is there any logging currently in Fairy Creek?
No, not to my knowledge. It came very close to happening, extremely close to happening, and the upper northwest portion of the upper valley. But apart from the logging that has occurred, understandably, right down at the very lowest end of the watershed, where the Fairy Creek drains into the adjacent river in the San Juan Valley, there has been no logging, no. And of course, that's what everybody wants to continue, absence of logging. And many people are focused, understandably, on a change in legislation to have it truly protected, because many people would argue it's not truly protected now. There are statutes that deal with the management of forest land, and there are some encouraging designations within Fairy Creek. But in terms of it having long-term full status as a protected area, no, that doesn't exist. I would love to see, while my days are here on this precious planet, that happen. But I'm sure, given the current political climate, it would continue to take a lot of effort over possibly a long period of time. But it's worth the effort. It's a very special place. In fact, for all of us who get out to Port Renfrew, and I think that probably applies to everybody listening tonight, it's wonderful to be able to go to Port Renfrew, to go down to the marina, and either the marina or at the main dock where the hotel is, the hotel, and look to the northeast. And as you look to the northeast, you'll see Fairy Creek Valley in great detail on a clear day. You don't see all of it because of the topography, but you can see a major portion, possibly 20% of the valley, and it's all dark green except for the very southern end, which of course doesn't have the same color because it's been logged down low. So I would recommend that. I know people that have come from back east, and we've had people come from all over the world, you know, not a lot, but people that are from great distances. And when they can actually see it with their naked eye, it gives it special meaning because it becomes more real when you can actually see it. And that's something you can do very easily.
Right. I'll just stop sharing here so we can see all the people. Okay. I think Tom Reinkin has a question. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, very distressing, discouraging sort of situation. I've sort of for many years, you know, starting on Haida Gwaii in the 70s, you know, these stories persist, and it's basically the bottom-up campaigns from students, from elders, etc., that give us reason, you know, for some optimism. But I just wanted to provide a comment. One of my own students at UVic was one of those arrested at Fairy Creek and spent a night in jail. And I inadvertently met one of the prosecutors who was involved. And I'm not really adding to any discussion that you've made, but just sort of a comment. And I asked the prosecutor, I said, like, I don't understand the law here. Like, why is this student? And I really teach a strong conservation ethic. And I said, why was she put in jail? And the prosecutor looked at me and said, because she damaged police property.
Yes.
I said, what? You know, they're trying to defend, you know, these 1,000-year-old forests, etc. And she is in jail for damaging police. And to me, I don't know, it goes back to the old statement, the law is an ass, you know, like it just seemed to me so discouraging, you know, what a very thoughtful prosecutor, that was their perspective, you know, on this issue. The student had to be prosecuted because they damaged police property. So anyway, that was just a comment anyway, that I felt I was so discouraged over the whole issue here of governance, etc. So anyway, that's all I had to say. So
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'll be careful not to devote too much time to this negative topic. But it's true that type of approach in terms of punishment was quite widespread. It certainly wasn't isolated to your one student. Many people that were out there were looking at being charged for disturbing police property. Also, you should be aware, if you haven't read it in the news, national news, that ever since the Fairy Creek turmoil, controversy boiled up in 2021 and to a certain extent in 2022. Soon after that, there was a review of police behavior on site because of serious concerns that it wasn't appropriate. And some of the findings have come back not in their favor, and the investigation is still continuing back east.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's positive news then for sure. Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question or the comment.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions for Jim? Either in the chat or if you want to show yourself and ask it directly. Sounds like there aren't any more questions, Jim. So I'd like to thank you very much for presenting the subject. And, you know, many of us were aware of it when it was happening, but it must admit it's kind of faded into the background with all the other things going on in the world. So it's good to reiterate what's going on there, and that we should all try and help out with hiking in there and taking pictures with our iNaturalist.
And also, as I mentioned, anyone that's interested in practically helping with the field work, that's going to be continuing. It's actually helping right now, not in the Fairy Creek area where it had been for several years, but it's focused on two areas. One, I mentioned 3 proposed cut blocks, which some people think are going to be imminently logged. And they're, if people are familiar with the Port Renfrew area, about 3 kilometers before you get to Port Renfrew, there's a road that goes to the left called the Elliott Main, and it provides access to these 3 cut blocks, which have very interesting ecosystems, including threatened species. And the other area is at the area which we'll all be familiar with, I'm sure, up north near Telegraph Cove. That's the Orca area. There's a rubbing beach up there. And those rubbing beaches are being threatened by logging that's proposed in the upper watershed that drains down into what's called Robson's Bight. And there's opportunities for volunteering up there.
Right. There is one question asking about where they can get the fixed wing footage that you mentioned earlier.
Well, Phil, I would like for you to know, and I apologize to you and for the rest of the people tuning in tonight for not having that ready. It's a long link. I have access to it because the fellow who was doing the photography is the chap that organized getting it on the internet. So if you can think of a way for them to contact myself, I can get them it directly, but I don't have it right now.
How if I put your email in the chat? Would you be okay with that?
Oh, certainly. Yes, happy to help. The more views this video receives, the better. It was quite expensive to have it filmed.
Yeah, just let me. I have to find it. Let's see. Okay. Jim Cuthbert 33. I'll just put that in here.
Yes, at gmail.com. I'll also mention, since the inquiry came in about the aerial photography, that the fellow that photographed it also has been a Fairy Creek supporter. He's been out there many times, and he's also active in the Victoria area in terms of conservation measures here too, or conservation initiatives. But he has a tremendous collection of hummingbird imagery. This is a video photography. So if anyone has a special interest in that and would like to be delighted with his images of hummingbirds and all their different activities, that's available to the public through him. And I can get that information.
Okay, is that on a YouTube or is it, you know?
Which was the name?
Is it on YouTube?
I'm not sure if I understand it's on a regular www website,
Okay.
but I don't know. Certainly, if you see the link, once I provide the link, that will answer that question, I think.
Okay.
But if you're the question you asked me now, when you say if it's on YouTube, as far as the imagery of the hummingbirds, I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's readily available though. Yeah.
So I've put your email in the chat, so anybody that wants more information can contact you directly, and I guess you could provide the link then.
And I'll certainly mention the fellow, Eric is his first name, Eric Pittman, and he's been involved in a number of really important public initiatives, including the latest one being sponsored for a new public garden, a community garden in Esquimalt. He was behind that. So he's a busy fellow.
Okay. So we've got a few thank yous. Rosemary Jorna. Thank you, Jim. Jean Dawson says, thank you so much for this information.
It's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. Elizabeth Garrett says, thank you for the excellent talk and for delivering food to the protesters. Leanne Brown says, thank you very much. Jan Robinson also. Eleanor McKinnon. Nancy and Pierre Lambert. No relation to me that I know of. So there you go.
All right. Thanks everybody for your thank you.
Oh, there's one more comment here from Tor Heinrich. The tripartite agreement of November 3rd, 2023 gives only until 2030 to achieve 30% of landscapes to be conserved.
Comments.
I didn't catch all of that, but I think that's in reference to the target that's been set in recent days and weeks, which is very encouraging. Also, it's very encouraging that the BC government has certainly earmarked significant funds towards better management of our forests. And that's also encouraging. Of course, we want to see it put into real practical terms as far as real protection that we can count on for all time in future. The other thing I'm going to mention, since I have an opportunity, if I can, just take a minute. Another spin-off initiative that resulted from the Fairy Creek protests and documenting the species that I talked about tonight, which is not complete, but we'll continue as we can, is the fact that what's at the heart of our concern is the questionable logging practices in British Columbia. And just yesterday, I believe it was the day before, I saw people out in the Victoria downtown area protesting the logging practices. It was a natural spinoff for some of us to have a look at what was happening in the Fairy Creek area. As you're going into the area just to the west of Fairy Creek, you cross a big bridge, a very large bridge over the Gordon River. And that's the site of a recent clear cut. And I and other people, including a photographer from Toronto, documented what we saw, which was very alarming. So we did the natural thing, which was to contact Ministry of Forest, got in touch with the person responsible. She viewed many photographs that I sent to her, and she agreed, yes, this does not look good in terms of meeting standards for logging in BC. So she agreed to review the photographs, as I mentioned, and said that it will be something that they would like to pursue when their limited staffing allows. And that's where it's at right now. So far, to my knowledge, what would be expected, which would be a visit by what they refer to as an inspecting forest officer, hasn't happened to my knowledge. But if anyone's interested in seeing these pictures, or some of them, just a handful of them, I'd be glad to share them, but they are very disturbing.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So I think looks like the questions have finished. So I think with that, I'll say thank you, Jim, for tonight's talk, and thank you everyone for attending. We had 74, I think, at the maximum number. So that's a good turnout. So I'll end the meeting now and stop the recording. Thank you, everyone.